Welcome to the True Stories of World War II podcast, where the stories are true and about World War II. I'm your host, Holden, better known on the internet as True Stories of World War II. Today, I have with me Ronald, better known on the internet as Oldmauserman. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Ronald.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Ronald. I'm a proud product of the University of Georgia. I am currently employed with the federal government, so you don't have to turn the thing off right now. But if you choose to do so, I'm not one of the bad guys. Um, I am a history major, have a master's degree from history from the University of Georgia, and have long been interested in history, especially histories of the American Civil War and World War II.
Awesome. I know a lot of people have been looking forward to having you on here. I've heard you referred to as the godfather of Instagram history. Everybody seems to universally like your page and like your content. And so I'm really been looking forward to having you on here and just kind of want to get into it.
It's nice to hear because I don't hear always the good stuff. I do hear some criticism from time to time. But we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to the criticism. I've been a fan of your page for years, even before I was doing this, before I started True Stories of World War II. So if I seem like I'm geeking out a little bit, I kind of am. It's kind of it's a pleasure to get to interview you, have a one-on-one conversation for our listeners here. So
I'm flattered and quite honored to be here.
awesome. All right. So before we get rolling here, I want to give a quick shout out to the people who made today's video possible. Black Sheep 302 and Cascade Surplus. If you want to be a sponsor of these videos, just send me a direct message on Instagram. Just for a dollar, you can sponsor one of these videos. And if you decide to sponsor at the $5 level, I'll send you some stickers. So send me a message on Instagram if that's something that you might be interested in. If it's not, that's all right too. Go ahead and just keep watching the videos. You never have to contribute if you don't want to. I'm just glad you're here. All right. So
if I can, I'll give Black Sheep a shout out too. I was listening to his ramblings on the way home today. He's got quite a story and quite a collection and quite an interesting guy to follow.
He is very interesting, and I'll be interviewing him later in the week here. So everybody at home can kind of just wait for that one to come out too. That should be a really interesting podcast. I think Black Sheep has some stuff he wants to show everybody. So, all right. If this is your first show, it's not going to matter too much. But if you've been listening to all the podcasts, this one's going to be a little different. We've spent a lot of time in the last couple podcasts really getting into controversial topics about World War II. And we might get into some controversy here, but it doesn't really have much to do with World War II. It's going to have more to do with Instagram and Instagram's hatred of history, I guess. I don't know a better way to put it. Instagram algorithms and semi-bans and full bans, but that's the kind of controversy we're going to get into today. It's going to be a little different than usual. Hey, but it's good to shake things up. I don't want this to get too stagnant or repetitive. And I have like the expert on Instagram bans with me, so why not ask him about them? So
I'm not sure I take that as a compliment.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you're posting enough history to be the expert, I guess it is. So I want to start at the beginning though, before we get too far into the weeds. What got you into history?
Well, I'll give you the long story since we got a little time here. It goes back to Channel 12 on Chattanooga television. And they used to run a series of movies, late nights on Saturdays, called the John Wayne Classic Theater. And I happened to be young enough to have to ask my parents if I could stay up late enough to watch it. Approval, I did over several weeks. And the first movie I saw was Flying Tigers. The second movie I saw was Sands of Iwo Jima.
Okay.
And that sparked it. I think at that point I was in the third grade.
Wow.
Maybe the fourth grade. And so I started going to the library. I'm originally from a small town in North Georgia, Chatsworth, Chatsworth. And the library in the Chatsworth Elementary School library was rather scarce, sparse when it comes to World War II history, but I did find a couple of books. One on Iwo Jima, which was interesting to me, and several on the European theater of operations. And so I just started reading, and I read everything I could get my hands on. I found that my dad had a couple of Reader's Digest books on World War II with lots of pictures. So I've studied those to the point where, every time I see a photograph, I recognize roughly where it is, what era or what part of the war it came from, and even some of the equipment. And over time, that interest developed into a hobby. I found some friends in intermediate school and high school who liked to play war games. Had quite a collection of those, and we would spend endless nights, literally overnights, playing war games. We had one called Campaign for North Africa that stretched all over the basement. And I think over the course of 2 years, we managed to finish about 3 months of the African campaign. It was so detailed. But all of those things helped me understand more and more about the campaigns and the figures and the equipment. And the more I knew, the more I wanted to know. And so it wasn't difficult for me when I went to college to pick history as a major. Now, I say it wasn't difficult for me to pick it as a major. It was difficult for me to stay a history major. I went through music, political science, geography, and then I think physics. And then I finally came back to history and stayed in history. I was worried in my college years that history was not going to give me a very well-paying job. And so I looked for other things, but history just kept drawing me back. And I ended my undergraduate program at the University of Georgia in 1985, went on to the graduate program there because they had a professor, Dr. Earl Zimke, who was quite an expert on World War II and was one of the few American historians who was studying the war in the East, the Soviet-German war. So I stayed there. I did my master's program there, got my master's in 1987, and then went off and spent 6 years wandering around, being interested in history, but not really finding a job that allowed me to practice it. A little later in 1993, I got a job with the old Immigration and Naturalization Service. I moved up to New York and was surprised at how much history really helped me in my job as an immigration officer. At the time I moved to New York, I had a very modest collection of small arms, medals, and various pieces of military equipment. Moving to New York, I found was not a cheap venture, and so almost all of that collection was sold just so that I could move to New York, much less stay there and remain there for a while. And finally, I moved now back down to a little further south into Virginia, and still working for the federal government, and have started rebuilding that collection. Now, I heard Black Sheep earlier today talking about the collectors community, and I have to be quite honest, I've never really considered myself a collector first. I've considered myself a historian who happened to start collecting rather than a collector who wanted then to find the history of the various pieces. So I found that kind of interesting when I heard him talking about that. I never really thought about it before. Am I a collector? Yeah, I guess I'm a collector. I have things that I have picked up over time,
Yeah.
but I picked them up to support the history interest rather than collecting for the sake of collecting or investing.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I think I could explain myself the same kind of thing, the same kind of way. I'm a studying historian too. I'll be finishing up my bachelor's here in the next year or so, and then moving into a master's. But that's how my collection kind of is too, is I don't really consider myself a collector. I'm really interested into history, and I just started to accumulate things that have historical significance, I guess. Um, that's a really great story how you got into history, very detailed. I really appreciate it. Very similar to how I got into history. Started very young, with my mom reading me books about the presidents, and I still to this
Hmm.
day I know like ridiculous trivia facts about every president that you'll never need to know. But that's where it started for me, and it kind of snowballed for there. And I love playing war games with my friends too. I mean, we played war games probably older than we'd like to admit, but um,
Hmm.
and I kind of relate too to the starting off with history and getting away from it for a while and coming back, because I originally out of high school had enrolled in college as a history major, but I never went to college. I went straight into the Marine Corps instead, even though I'd been accepted into college. Something sparked to me and I never went. And then 4 years later, after some fun in the Marine Corps, I came back as a history major, and I'm a couple years into it now. But yeah, I kind of had a roundabout way too of coming back at it. But
Fun
I
in the
just,
Marine Corps. I'm not sure I've heard that phrase.
yeah, it is what it is. But I had a very uh, different path to pursuing history too. So I kind of relate. It's kind of been different, and I guess that kind of leads me into the next thing I wanted to talk about is that you have a master's degree in history, and I mean, you could think about it as giving advice to me, or you can think about it as giving advice to anybody who might be thinking about pursuing history degrees at a bachelor's level or a master's level. Do you have any advice for people that are looking at pursuing those kinds of degrees? Because like you mentioned, it is a very niche thing, and it could be difficult to find a job. So there's a lot of people that have a passion for history but don't necessarily want to pursue it as a career because they're worried about that.
Right. Yeah. I think you're exactly right. There are a lot of people who look at history and think, it's about reading books and learning dates about late dates and names of kings and dictators. And, it's a lot more than that. For anybody that follows me for a while, I think there's one word that shows up a lot in my posts, and that's context. And that's something that history gives you that really applies to today. It applies to your own life. It applies to how we treat each other. It applies to how nations treat each other. It applies to how we see each other. It's easy for us to look at specific times and specific people and specific groups of people or specific nations in history and say, oh, that was bad, or oh, that was good. But we're judging them from sometimes hundreds of years later, not really realizing the way they were raised, the way the people were raised, not really realizing the social pressures that they faced, the economic pressures that they faced, the nationalist feelings that they might have had or not. There are a number of factors that we just simply cannot understand unless we take the time to understand it. And that's what history can give us. Now, professionally, um, I do have to say that I was skeptical that history was going to give me much of a basis for a successful and well-paying career. Now, working for the government, I could argue that I'm not, all that well paid, but at the same time, I've done well. And history has helped me really all along the way, because in the work that I've done, I right now work in legislative affairs. History has helped me understand how Congress works. History helps me understand how states work. History helps me understand how really the United States government works and doesn't work. It has helped me understand how people interact with one another at the national level. And, I've been able to apply that on a person-to-person basis in terms of immigration applications and petitions that have been filed, because I know something about geography, I know something about history. In some cases, I can look at a document and tell whether it makes sense. Um, I have been in a situation before where a younger officer came to me with a document, a birth certificate from Poland from 1943. Of course, it had a swastika on it. this guy, the young officer, had no idea that Germany was occupying Poland at that time, thought that the document was fake and was about to deny the application. So wait, take a look at this. Now remember 1943, where the Germans were, the Poles didn't have a government. They were part of the government general. So, history does help you. Now, of course, the pure art of being a historian probably will lead you into academics or, potentially some entertainment fields, some of which are difficult to get into and some of which are not very well paying. But I would urge anyone who has that strong interest in history to explore what the options are. Find out what you can do with a history degree. Find out, do you want to teach? Do you not want to teach? Do you want to be an entertainer or not an entertainer? History is a great jumping off point for law school. It's a great jumping off point for politics. It's a great jumping off point for international relations. I find that it's a great jumping off point for a lot of things if it's not going to be specifically a history career itself.
And I think that's really good information for anybody who's thinking about pursuing a career in history or even education in history, because I think for a long time, people have been told, if you're going into history, you better want to be a teacher or you better want to compete for a low paying museum job. So it's good to hear, all these other options and that you've had a successful career with a history degree, not necessarily pursuing history, but it's been applicable. And I guess we kind of already answered my next question because we were going to talk about what your career is and how history has helped you. But I guess I'm thinking on my toes here a little bit. But did you ever have any thoughts about being a teacher or academic?
I did. That was my original intention. As I was moving into grad school, I fully intended to move on to a PhD program. There's another story in here about listening to a radio commercial one day and applying to be an air traffic controller, going away for a while, coming back and not ever going back into a PhD program. But it was something that was on my mind, and it's something I feel now I probably should have pursued, especially now that I've been on Instagram for a couple or 3 years. I've had a number of people come and tell me that I do have an art or have a knack for telling history, for telling the stories, and for helping people understand certain aspects of history that maybe they had not thought of before. I would like to have been able to do that for tens or hundreds or maybe thousands of students over time. In my early 20s, however, having been given a couple of chances to be a student teacher and a teacher's aide in college, and seeing the level of interest in some of the entry-level history courses, I was a little bit disgusted and figured, air traffic control was probably more exciting. It would probably pay better. I could do it now. And off I went for a career that didn't work out. And once I returned to Georgia, then I just never got back into the academic program.
I don't know. I think it's interesting you bring up air traffic control because so many people burn out of that. Like it's one of the highest burnout rate jobs there is. So talking about jobs that don't have like a realistic future and like going from history to air traffic control, it's like you got a pretty bad hand there. But
I burned out before I ever got there. So
it's really interesting. But we're kind of already tiptoeing into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is great. I love when things kind of segue in the direction I'm hoping. I want to get into this. You've gathered quite a following on Instagram, and when you talk about being a teacher and reaching hundreds or thousands of people in a career, I mean, you reach thousands of people with a post on Instagram. So I guess my first question about that is, how did you gather such a following on Instagram?
Your guess is as good as mine. I started out, I think my very first post was of the front of a P-47, a photo that I took up at the Udvar Hazy Museum up in Chantilly, Virginia. And I don't think anybody ever saw that one. And it probably was 3 or 4 months before I posted something else. Might have been a flower or a picture of a dog. I don't know. It I wasn't getting into the Instagram thing at all. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what followers were, anything. Um, I, I I guess it was about 4 years ago, maybe a little over 4 years ago. I went to a gun show up here in Chantilly and picked up a Lee Enfield rifle and brought it home, took a picture of it, put it on Instagram, and poof, I had about 5 followers. I thought that was interesting. And then one of the followers said, "You took a good picture. Do you know how to use hashtags?" I didn't even know what a hashtag was, but I quickly learned and I started applying some hashtags to things. I went through Instagram and started looking at other history pages, some museum pages, some photography pages, some nature pages, and of course, a few firearms pages, and started to see how people staged the photographs and a little bit of what they said about the photographs or the pieces that they were photographing. And over time, I worked on the photography. I have a few backdrops that I use that just normal stuff around the house, a couple of old bags and a couple of old jackets and a few things. But and I experimented with lighting, trying to reduce shadows. And oh, it really, I don't think it took more than a year or two before I started being complimented on the quality of the photographs. And I'm taking pictures with an iPhone in the basement with just whatever lighting is down here, and occasionally outside. Excuse me. But I think another aspect of it is that I was interacting with the people who were watching my page. So if anybody would ask me a question, either in the comment box or in direct messaging, I would answer them. And I would try to give them a good answer if it was a question, or I would try to help them with whatever issue they had with the photograph. In some cases, I would respond. I had some criticism on some of the posts, and I would respond with what I was thinking, often using that word context. And the page just took off. I remember one morning I came down. I went to bed with I think about 300 followers, and I woke up the next morning with 1,000. And that was after a post of a MAS 36. Which I didn't even think was particularly a good photograph, but it picked up all kinds of followers, and so for several months I was interested in the followers. I give me more followers, and I was hashtagging everything, and that's a habit I still need to break. But it wasn't until I got shadow banned that I realized that it's not about the followers; it's about the content. In the stories that you can tell with the content, and hopefully the education that you can bring to hundreds or thousands of individuals who may not have as much exposure to real history as you and I did.
Right.
So I just think there's really a combination of all of that. Fairly decent pictures, decent context and content, some discussion and some interaction. And all of that together, I think, helped promote that page.
I totally agree with all that stuff. I really enjoy your content. I think your production value is a lot better than most people, and your captions are thoughtful. But I think one thing you mentioned while you were talking was you got your start about 4 years ago, and Instagram was a little kinder to firearms pages at that time frame. I obviously wasn't around then. My account's only about 6 months old, but from people I've talked to from that time frame, things didn't seem to be so oppressive maybe on Instagram. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, unfortunately it is. And, I feel like anyone who's interested in firearms or who posts photos of firearms, who also is interested in history and really wants to have some intelligent discussions about some of the darker phases of history, it suffers from a double whammy. Instagram doesn't seem to like gun pages, and it doesn't seem to like any kind of symbols of regimes, individuals, political parties, or certain eras of history that were evil, reprehensible, whatever word you want to use. And to me, that it frightens me, quite frankly, that we're now shutting down discussion of what I think are very interesting and important topics, because a photograph includes an image of a swastika or a hammer and sickle, or a Confederate flag, or you can look left and right and you can find symbols all over the place that offend someone. But it seems like over the course of the last couple of years, I've offended everybody.
Yeah.
And it shut down discussions that I think are just important.
Right. And, a big part of this podcast has been talking about those controversial topics that we can't talk about on Instagram. And that's kind of the reason that I came up with this outlet, is because I was so sick of like every week there being some new, oh, what did I say this week that it offended a bunch of people that it shouldn't have offended a bunch of people? Because it's a conversation. There's a lot of open-ended questions when it comes to World War II and history in general. And I think that's part of the draw to history, is it's debatable. It's not like other sciences. It's not so hard in the sand, because there's a human element to it, and there's mistakes that happened in recording. And I mean, we could have these debates, but not on Instagram. But
well, and yeah, and you touched on something. You go to bed and wonder who you have offended. And I don't know that it's bad for us to worry about that. I think in some cases it's good to be offended,
right.
and I don't mind if somebody is offended by something that I post, if they'll take the time to understand why it's there.
Right.
And I can point to one of the incidents that really irked me was I posted a book review of a book called They Thought They Were Free, that right up on the corner. I don't know if you could see it there, but the front of it, of course, has a swastika on it. And it's a story of 10 Germans who lived through the Nazi regime. And it tells the story of why they became Nazis. The story is written by a Jewish author who did not tell any of the subjects that of his religion or descent, and it was illuminating why the 10 people became Nazis. Some of them became Nazis because that's the way you would advance in government. Some of them became Nazis because your supplies were better at the bakery. Some of them, were Nazis because they were true ardent Nazis, and they had some issues with race, religion, politics, communists. So those stories, though, need to be understood, because the factors that led those individuals to become Nazis may be existing today or tomorrow. And if we don't recognize them, we run I think, a big danger of having to live through that kind of an era again. And that worries me. And when I look at what the schools teach now, and when I look at the kinds of stories that are banned on Instagram, Facebook, and other outlets, it just worries me that we're not learning the danger signs of tyranny. It's just, it saddens me that there's so much history, so much that can be learned from history, and it's just being completely ignored because we become offended by a symbol.
Yeah, and I totally get it. And I think the most frustrating part for me is that Instagram could be a great tool for teaching history. Because like I've said before in other interviews and podcasts, people are already on Instagram. they don't have to go out of their way to get a history lesson. All they have to do is come across one of our posts or somebody else in our little community's posts, and they don't have to go to a separate website or read a book. It's already somewhere that they're at. So it's a great tool if we were allowed to utilize it as one. And I think I really do worry about the direction that history education is going to. I don't want to get too crazy political about it, but when you're learning history at a college level now, it feels really like you have to shoehorn every different social group into whatever you're learning in history. And it starts to water it down a little bit. Like, and here's what this group was doing, and here's what this group was doing, and here's what this group was doing. And it starts to be like, that's just unneeded extra information that doesn't really apply. But history is really, it's starting to take on this really social element. And that's hard for me to like talk about because I'm really focused on some social elements of history. My focus is obviously World War II, but also genocide and human atrocity studies, and that kind of like muddies the water between history and sociology a little bit. But I think that history is getting a little too social, and part of that is because we're becoming very emotional when it comes to telling history. We let our emotions tell us like we can't teach this. It's too scary. It's too messy for kids to learn. But I think that we have to teach the bad parts, the messy
Yeah,
parts.
I think if it is scary, there's a reason why it was scary, and if we don't recognize the reasons why it was scary, it's just bound to repeat. Because I can guarantee you this: there are some twisted souls out there who are reading history and they are learning from it, and they will use the lessons of history in an evil way if they are not checked. And I feel like it's our responsibility to do some of that checking. We need to be able to say, I see what you're doing, it is wrong, and I'm going to bring other people to see what you're doing that is wrong.
Right. And I think that's really a valid point, is there are people learning from history, and they're learning how to use it to their advantage. I just wrapped up a Latin American modern history class, and I just wrote a paper about Hugo Chavez in
Mhm.
Venezuela in the 90s, using the image of Simon Bolivar during the Spanish American Revolution to farther his political career. But a dictator, knew how to use history to his advantage. And I mean, that's just one
Yeah,
example, but people are learning this stuff. So everybody needs to learn it. So you can call it out when you see it, and we don't have to have another human atrocity, another genocide. I've written about that too, where it's like, we know the signs of genocide. We know what to look for leading up to like mass killings, but it continues to happen. Even though we know the cheat codes, we know the answers to the test, but it keeps happening. So,
right. You're exactly right.
and so we've already kind of like tiptoed into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is censorship on Instagram. And I think that about as well as anybody. I mean, you've mentioned that you've been shadow banned. I know you've been hemorrhaging followers for a long time because of all the crazy rules on Instagram, but you've also had a lot of posts taken down. I actually haven't had any posts taken down. I've been banned multiple times, but haven't actually had posts removed. Um, maybe just like a timeline of your conflict that you've had with Instagram. I know you've sent letters to them, and they've been sent back, and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I think I've been shadow banned 6 times. I told somebody the other day 8 times, but I think it's accurately 6 times. And for those of you who are not aware, shadow ban basically is where any hashtags that you use are inactivated, and most of the outside world beyond your immediate group of followers won't see anything that you post. So it limits your exposure to new followers, and I think in some cases even it will limit your exposure to some of your followers. Um, but the first instance that I had with that was actually with a photograph of a Mauser rifle and an M1 rifle, sitting next to one another. And I think the caption went something like, I'll take rifles for 200, Jack. Going back to what is the Joker's Wild game show. And apparently, some algorithm in Instagram took the 200 with the $ in front of it to mean I was trying to sell the rifles. I wasn't. Took the photograph down and shadow banned me for 15 days. I didn't understand at all why that was happening at the time. And of course, I appealed it and got no answer. I sent emails and got no answer. And then I just lived with it. I've been shadow banned since then for posting a photograph of the book. They thought they were free. I've been shadow banned for posting a photograph of some Christmas ornaments that bore the swastika, along with a story on how the Nazis tried to co-opt Christmas. In each instance, I feel like if anyone at Instagram or really any viewer had taken the time to read the captions, to read the story about why that photograph was posted, it would have, or in my mind, should have led to a different outcome. It should have been allowed. Now, excuse me, I realize I don't have the ability or right, and I don't want the ability or the right to tell someone that they should or shouldn't be offended by a symbol. But those symbols are real, and they represent evil parts of our collective world history. And to tear down a story and to tear down the image, it just limits the discussion of that, which gets back to what we were talking about earlier. It limits the ability, I think, of some of the younger generations to understand evil and what it looks like and how it came to be. It worries me that images and symbols limit this discussion. And I think it's not just an Instagram thing. I think it's a worldwide thing. I won't even say national. I'll say worldwide. That we have become so defensive about certain images and symbols. We have become so touchy about images and symbols and sometimes phrases that it limits discussion, it limits debate. And I hear quite often, especially if you watch any of the major news programs, hear quite often, we need to have a discussion. We need to sit down. We need to talk. We need to debate these issues. We need to come to understanding. And I just, for the life of me, can't figure out how we can do any of that if we limit from the outset the factors that that lead us to the point of needing to sit down, that lead us to the point of needing to have these debates. If I can't understand how a nation could put a Hitler into place as its leader, if I can't understand how a nation could put a Mussolini into place as its leader, then I'm going to be very limited in my ability to understand anything that you want to talk about in terms of choosing your political leaders. I need to know those factors. I need to know, what were the economic factors, the political factors, what were the social factors, what were people thinking, what were just take Nazi Germany, for instance. What were the Catholics thinking? What were the Protestants thinking? What were the Social Democrats thinking, or the Christian Democrats? What were the communists thinking? All of those things are important to understand, as well as understanding the construct of the German Constitution, understanding the aftermath of World War I, understanding the economic conditions in the 1920s and the 1930s, as people were looking for solutions to problems that they didn't understand. And when somebody came along and gave them the answer, even if it wasn't the right answer, they flocked to it. And you can look around the world right now and see it happening again. Now, will it lead to another Hitler? Will it lead to another Stalin? again, I don't know. That's not, we haven't determined that yet. But when you start to see those factors lining up, when you start to see individuals playing on fear, playing on racial differences or religious differences or national differences, when you start to see all of these factors add up, it does make you, I think, stop and go, what's going on here? What are they trying to do? And what is my place in all of this? And is this something that I'm in favor of? Is it something that I am opposed to? And is there anything I can do about it? That's what I think, going back, history can teach us. Context is an important word. But if we just completely ignore it because I'm offended by a swastika or a hammer and sickle or, a rainbow flag or, a Jolly Roger or a Confederate flag, whatever the symbol might be, if I'm offended by that, I've already shut down that conversation.
I think that's really valid. I think we've kind of lost the ability to be able to debate stuff because you don't want to step on toes. You don't want to be the bad guy, but I don't think that you are, I think it's a valid conversation. And like I was saying before, I mean, we know the signs of terrible things to come. I mean, history, like having a history book is like having the cheat codes. We
Mm-hmm.
know what's going to happen. Well, we can't throw it all away because we kind of find it offensive. So
I'll give you an example if we have time.
yeah.
I growing up in the South, I was heavily exposed to Confederate history, and a number of my friends, would proudly wave the Confederate flag, flew it out of the back of their truck, had it hanging on their walls. I grew up idolizing Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, and I still consider them to be fine military commanders. And I took the time to read the Confederate Constitution and to read books like Emory Thomas's The Confederate Nation, and books like, see it right up there, Roll Jordan Roll, The World the Slaves Made, trying to understand the history of the South. And through I probably read 100 books on the South and the Confederacy and the idea of the Confederate Nation and what it stood for. And through all of those books and through all of the courses that I took and through everything I knew about the Confederacy, I had a hard time understanding why people couldn't see the Confederate flag as a symbol of a region and not a symbol of hatred. And it was only, a few weeks ago, I think, with some of the discussions that I was seeing on the news, as well as some discussions with friends of mine who are offended by the Confederate flag, that I started to understand that I was able to separate slavery from the Confederate government structure. In my mind, I could look at the Confederate government structure and think, this is a good thing. The six-year single term for a president, the maintenance of most rights at the state level, trying to keep government small, keep a central government out of the state's business. All of these things I liked. I now realize I can't separate the slavery issue from the government issue. The government, of course, was built on the idea that slavery was okay, and slavery was not okay, and I've never believed that it was. But it took years for me to come to that, and it took a lot of discussions with people who are animated about how can I be the way I am? How can I think that there's anything good about the Confederacy? And while I was able to discuss it with them, and I think that they understand where I was coming from, it wasn't really until just several weeks ago that I realized that how they are seeing me and why they think that I'm wrong. Now, am I still proud of being from the South? Absolutely. Do I still think Robert E. Lee was a good general? Yes. Do I think Stonewall Jackson was the best general probably in the 19th century American history? Yes, I do. But I also no longer will run around saying, oh, I'm a Confederate. I've learned better. But without those discussions and really without those symbols,
Right.
I don't know that I ever would have come to this point.
Yeah, and I think that's a great story and a great analogy for it. You can't stick your head in the sand on this stuff. You have to be able to debate it with an open mind. And if you would have immediately stuck your head in some sand and said, I'm not talking about it. I support this. This is what I believe in. You would have never had a change of opinion. And I mean, you could use that analogy for any kind of issue in your life. But since we're talking about history, that's what I mean. But,
Yeah. I probably just generate a whole lot of hate mail for both of us here. So,
it is what it is. I'm from the North. So, all right. Kind of like wheel it all back to where we started on this. What do you think? Is there a future for history content on Instagram, or should we be looking for the next best thing?
I think there is, and I think once we start to understand how Instagram operates, we'll be better prepared to deal with it. I don't think I've been shadow banned in close to a year now. I've learned to obliterate swastikas if I'm going to post anything with a swastika on it. I've learned to be careful or cover up certain Soviet images if I'm going to post anything from the Soviet Union. Although I do find it that Soviet materials don't get shadow banned as much as Nazi materials. I've learned to avoid certain words. You don't want to use the word of a certain German dictator. That will trigger possible review, but almost certain shadow ban. In understanding these things, I can write around them, and I can doctor some of the photographs to make them acceptable to the platform. Excuse me. So I do think that there is a future for the past on Instagram.
It's great.
Just we have to adapt. I just wish, at the same time that we're adapting, I wish that Instagram would be. I wish Instagram would have the debates with us about why we're posting the things that we post or why we say the things we say.
Yeah, and I totally get that. And I mean, you've got a lot more of a following than I do, and you can't get a response. So who am I to even expect to hear back from them? And that's really frustrating to me. It's because I want to have this debate, and this last ban that I received from Instagram had nothing to do with my content. It was, you're using a bot to get likes from other pages. Well, no, I'm not. For one, I don't have that kind of money. Okay, that's number one. But number two is, it almost feels like a direct attack because, hey, you're garnering too much attention on our platform. There's no way you could be doing that without paying some service, which is really frustrating.
Yeah.
And the frustrating thing is to get around this shadow ban or regular ban or not being able to get your historical content. All you got to do is pay Instagram. They'll promote your content for you. You can get around it. And that's frustrating to me because.
Well, I found that not necessarily true. I tested that one time on a photo that led to a shadow ban. I reposted. It was not taken down, and I hit promote just to see what would happen, and I got a pretty quick answer that it did not meet the Instagram requirements and that they would not allow me to promote it. So I don't know what, I really don't know the criteria that Instagram uses for shadow bans. I don't know the criteria for what leads them to take a photograph down, and I don't know what criteria they use to determine what can and can't be promoted. Every time I'm shadow banned, they give me some explanation that's very general, and then I look for, okay, what did my photograph have that they say was that triggered the shadow ban, and I can't find it. Allegiance with a hate group. Well, I'm not aligned with a hate group. I do talk about some groups that were hateful because again, I think it's important to share that kind of information. But I'm not aligned with a hate group, and I'm not going to be. So like you said, it's frustrating. I trying to play the game without knowing all the rules.
Yeah, and that's kind of what it feels like sometimes for sure. And I mean, this is my longest, I mean, actually banned. Like I cannot post for, I mean, it was 7 days, now it's 3 days. I'm counting down. Like I miss it. Like something I posted every day for 6 months.
Mhm.
It stinks
It
being,
becomes a part of your life.
yeah, it really is. I mean, I don't, that's a great way to put it, I guess. It's a part of my life. It's something I'm passionate about. I love interacting with people and seeing the comments and the likes and the messages. So it's been a rough couple days for me. I really appreciate a lot of people have reached out. That means a lot. Um, but I'm going to follow your advice and really tiptoe going forward. I, but like you said, you don't have all the rules. So I'm going to mess up eventually again. And I don't know. Like I have paid for promotions in the past, never more than about $10 for like a couple days, but to like test the waters. And I don't know the criteria for getting stuff promoted either because I've never had an issue getting something pushed
Hmm.
through to get promoted. Um, the last thing I promoted was a story I wrote on the anniversary of D-Day where I interviewed a soldier who was in Afghanistan with a flag that his grandfather had carried across the beach on D-Day. I figured that'd
Hmm.
be a great one to get out to the biggest audience as possible. That went through no problem.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That was a couple months ago, but and like I don't know how many times or how for how long I've been shadow banned. I know I only reach about 2% of people that aren't in my audience, which pretty
So
much
that
means
doubles me.
yeah.
I always get less than 1%. So
So yeah, and I don't want to give Instagram any money anymore, to be honest with you. The only reason I ran promotions in the past is so I can do these like sponsorship write-ups and be like, if you sponsor me at this level, this is how many people you can expect to see the post. And I mean, that's about it. I
hmm.
wouldn't give them money willingly again. But I digress. We were going to talk about a book, but I think we're going to save that for another video. And I guess that gives me an excuse to interview you again, which I
I'm fine with that. This has been a lot of fun.
yeah, it's been really great to chat with you, and I hope to be able to grow this podcast and have people come back and new people, and hopefully, since you got a little bit more of a fan base, people will watch this. They'll want to get interviewed too. Um, I hope you had fun at least. um, let's see what else.
Yeah, it's been a healthy debate. Let's just put it that way. I've enjoyed it. It's always fun to talk with anybody who is willing to listen to the stories of history or the stories of World War II. Your namesake page here. And I do think it's important. I think especially if we look at the generation that won World War II, the generation that endured World War II, and watched them slowly drifting away. Uh, Somebody has to keep those memories alive. Somebody has to keep the stories alive. And I'm a strong supporter of the World War II Museum down in New Orleans. I think they're doing an outstanding job. Um, but I think we need more than that. We need people who are interested in the individuals and the equipment and the campaigns, the political figures and the GIs. Everybody who took part in the 1930s and the 1940s. I think it's very important to understand it. It helps us understand where we are, how we got here, and most importantly, I think it helps us understand what we need to be looking for today to avoid a repeat of the horrors of World War II.
That's really fair. All right. Kind of got my last little part here is mostly business, and the first part of the business is where can we find you? Obviously you're Oldmauserman on Instagram. I don't think anybody listening at this point didn't already know that. They're probably huge fans already, but I know you have a blog, worldwar2online.com, and I know you have a couple you still have a secondary Instagram page as well?
I do. It's I'll try to remember what it is.
World War II
World War II discussion
discussion.
group. I
Yeah,
think it's World War
number 2.
II
Yeah.
underscore TWO. Wow, I can find it real
I'll,
quick.
I'll link it underneath the video on YouTube so people will be able to find it.
World War II underscore discussion underscore group.
Can we find it anywhere else, or are those 3 sources about the?
I have a Facebook page, and I don't even remember the name of it. Sometimes stuff is automatically uploaded to it. It's not something that I maintain.
Okay.
One day I may, once I retire, I may look at that as an additional outlet. But right now it's basically Instagram and the World War II discussion group on the internet.
Awesome. Oh, we kind of we maintain a Facebook page for the same reason. It's my backup for my Instagram account. Basically, if the whole thing got wiped, at least there'd be carbon copies of everything somewhere. So I'm going to jump into the last little spiel here. I just want to thank everybody who's been supporting these podcasts. And we've had a huge influx of followers this week. I think we've gained like 6% of our total followers, which is like 140 people in the last week, which is crazy because we've been pretty stagnant. I know part of that is due to the podcast, but a large part is due to like the mass support we've received during this ban on Instagram. And I really appreciate that. It's been a rough time for me and my friends and people that like to read our content every day. And I appreciate all the support and everyone that's hanging with us and supporting us and sending us messages and shouting out our posts on their stories. And just know it doesn't go unnoticed. And I'm going to be back here in a couple days. Just wait a little longer. And then last thing I want to say, last little plug. If you want to be a sponsor of one of these videos, just send me a message on Instagram and we will get that worked out. Sponsorships go towards things like being able to look at different kinds of merch. I'd like to do some stories of World War II t-shirts or patches. Stuff's not cheap, guys. I'm still sitting on like a couple $100 worth of stickers that haven't been sold yet. So, he's got his right there. Appreciate that. If anybody's interested in that kind of stuff, let me know. But I'd really like to be able to do stuff like that. But $1,000 for t-shirts out of pocket is a little. I got to be able to offset that a little bit to get rolling. I don't plan to make any money off that, honestly. Like I'm going to sell you guys t-shirts for what they cost. Other than that, like I was just saying, check us out on Facebook because if Instagram totally goes bye-bye, that's where we're going to be until I can make a new Instagram account, I guess. And hopefully it doesn't come to that. I'm hoping we'll be back in a couple days here. That's it for me. Do you have anything you'd like to say to close us off?
I just appreciate you having me on here. I think it's been a lot of fun. I hope we do have additional conversations. There's a whole lot of World War II to talk about. So yeah, we will see you again soon, I hope.
Sounds good. And I can't wait to have you back. Actually, our next podcast is going to be Black Sheep. I'm going to record with him on Saturday, but it'll probably be a couple days before that comes up.
That'll be fun.
All right. Other than that, guys, I'll see you in my Instagram stories until I can start posting again. Have a great day.